Everybody, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be showing you step by step how I edit my Mavic 3 Pro photos. So here I have pulled up a raw file of the Manhattan Bridge and we shot it at 800 ISO at f4. Now this was a long exposure. I had it set for 1 second. Alright, so the first step, I usually go ahead and mess around with the lighting. So for this scenario, I'm going to bring up the exposure, bring down the highlights, bring up the shadows. Now usually with the whites and the blacks, for the windows I hold the Alt key. So when you increase the whites, you'll see all the highlights that you're bringing up. And same thing with the blacks. The lower you go, the more detail you're losing in those dark areas. So I usually just bring it up a little bit. So far, this is what we have done. Go ahead into color. So this is that shot. It's a little on the warmer tone. I'm going to go ahead and bring down the temperature a little bit. Give it a cooler look. Bring up the vibrance, saturation. Go into the effects. Bring up the clarity a little bit. Usually, because it's the summertime, you will get a haze in the photos. So I usually like to bring up the haze a little bit, maybe to 5. All right. Now I'm going to go into the curve. So usually I create the 3 dots. All right, so first I'm going to bring up the shadows. So the last line, if you actually bring it up, it's going to give it the blacks a little fade. This is the midtones. Actually, I'm probably going to keep it as is. These are the highlights. Just lower it a little bit. Smooth it out. So far, that's the difference. Usually then I go into the color grading. So for the midtones, just gonna lower it a little bit. Probably gonna give it a little bit of a cooler look. The highlights, usually keep it as is. Now here you can give a different feel for the photo. You can go into the reds or the blues. Probably gonna go into the warmer tones on the highlights, since the midtones are in the cooler side. The shadows, usually I don't mess around with the shadows. All right. So for the detail, since I've opened this file before, I actually denoised it. And I believe the denoise that I used was 25. So basically what it does, it just removes some grain from the photo. As you can see here, you can barely tell that any AI tool was used. Looks pretty clean. Now for the sharpening, it's already pretty sharp. I usually tend not to add any sharpness, but I'll just bump this up to 55. Definitely can't really tell a difference. Now, also with the sharpening, what you could do, you can actually mask. And by masking, so you hold down the Alt key and you go ahead and mask, and all the areas in white is what's going to get sharpened, and everything that's in black is going to be left alone. So that way you're not sharpening things that you don't need to, especially for this, just blank sky. You don't need to sharpen that. That's just going to add extra noise. Yeah. So usually for that, you would zoom all the way out, and then when you're masking, yeah. let's even try something extreme, 75. That's too much. I'm gonna bring it back down to 55. All right. Now, the next step is that I go ahead and go into the crop tool, and then usually I'll lay it out. I'll do correction. So you can do auto. For this scenario, I'll probably just use this particular. Usually I'll go into the masking. So here, I go ahead and I click sky. Usually does a good job with masking out whatever you pick. So for this scenario, I probably want it a little bit on the, give the sky a little bit more of a blue tone. Decrease the clarity a little bit to give it a more of a softer look. Maybe increase the saturation. All right. For the next step, depending on how this is going to work, but this is select object tool. So usually you'll just paint around what you wanted to highlight. Here I'm zooming out as I'm scrolling through. Now, what I'm doing here is actually I want to just select this particular area and I want to bring down the highlights so we can see more detail that's within the bridge. Bring up the shadows, bring up the contrast a little bit, and the exposure. Bring down the highlights a little bit more. All right. So here's before and after. That looks a little flat. Oh, let's see now. Yeah, that looks a little better. All right. Now for the next step, I'm going to highlight the upper part of the bridge. Yeah, did a pretty good job. All right, so it did highlight the middle of the bridge, which I don't want. So I'm going to go ahead and just subtract that. So by subtracting it, hit the Alt key while you're doing it. So it goes into the minus, if you want to put it that way. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up the exposure a little bit. That looks pretty good. Bring up the whites. Just ever so slightly. Maybe I'll add a little bit of clarity. That looks pretty good. All right, so here's before and after. You can also use masks, so like something like this. So I'm gonna feather it to 100% so it blends in nice. Bring up the exposure a little bit of a contrast. For this scenario, I'm gonna probably add a little bit of clarity and DAs. There we go. Actually, I'm gonna bring down the clarity a little bit so it doesn't take away from the center point of the bridge. All right. All right, so I'm going to use a gradient tool to mask. I'm going to bring up the shadows and bring down the highlights. All right, so this is so far before and after. I think overall the photo looks a little flat to me, so I'm going to go ahead into the effects. Maybe bring up the dehaze tool a little bit. All right, that looks a little better. You can always go into the color mixer. You can mess around with the hue saturation, and luminance. So usually what this means, so like let's say for the blues, you can go ahead and change what tone you want it to be. Or you can click this tool right here and go ahead and select particular, like let's say the greens, and you can mess around with the mouse. And it'll pick that particular color that you're clicking on. I tend not to use this tool too much because I will show you later on what I do use to color correct. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and open the file. All right, so the first step, we're going to create a mask or a copy, not a mask, I'm sorry. I'm going to go into the selective color. Now I have a lot of presets in here, but we're going to go ahead and do everything from scratch. So first you start with the red. So here I'm increasing the saturation of the red from what I could see. So the magenta, so increase that. This is totally up to you. You know, everybody sees colors a little bit differently. I'm just going based on what I like. Go ahead to yellows. Okay, greens. Now make sure when you're doing this that you're actually looking at the area where you do have, like, let's say green. So for me in particular, it's going to be in the bottom left corner. Sometimes you can edit colors that you don't even really have in the photo, and you won't even be able to tell what you're doing. Okay, cyan, so that's definitely going to affect my photo since majority of the colors in here are blues. Okay. With the blues, I tend not to try to take away that magenta purple coloration. I try to get that out of the photo like this. But you don't want to overdo it either, because then it could start looking a little bit unnatural. Okay. All right. Not too much magentas in this photo. Go ahead, double click to bring it back to 0. All right, now the whites. Those affect the photo usually. So if you can tell here, it gives it a more of a pinkish tone, or here it's more of a bluish tone. So I tend to go a little bit more towards the blue. I'm gonna set it to 8. Same here, more of a white blue tone. Okay. So now that's before, and that's after. Okay. Also, if you like a particular preset, what you can do is go ahead, hit the 3 bars or the 4 bars, I can't even tell. Save select the color preset. As you can tell, I have a bunch left. You just put a title, click save, and then when you upload next photo, what you can do, just hit over here and pick whatever color, you know, whatever preset you saved. Save you a lot of time that way. All right, so go ahead, exit out of that. Next step is curves. All right, same thing. I create the 3 dots. So in this particular case, I'm probably going to add an extra one here, so that way I can be more meticulous on my shadows. Keep that there. Probably bring down the midtones. Actually, that looks good. It's the highlights. Actually, I'm probably going to bring it down a little bit. There we go. That's before, that's after. I don't know if I like that. One of the things I try to do, especially with the curve tool, is to bring up more depth to the photo so it doesn't look as flat. All right, that looks pretty good. So that's before, that's after. All right. So next I'm going to go into the levels. Here, usually bring down the midtones, bring up the highlights. Usually gives it a bit of a pop to the image. You can also bring down the blacks. In this particular scenario, I'm probably going to keep it as is. That's before, after. Definitely gives you more of a contrasty look. All right, so I'm going to hit Shift, bring it down all the way to the copy. It'll highlight all the masks, merge the layers. All right, so this is basically everything that we edited once we loaded it from the raw. So this is before, and this is after. I'm going to create another copy. All right, so one of the secrets that I try to do to add a little bit more of a sharpness, I'm going to create another copy. Then you're going to hit Filter, Other, High Pass. All right, so depending on the photo and the resolution, usually you stick it at 1.0. For this particular case, I'm going to do 0.5. Okay. Now here, you're going to click on Overlay. And here's before and after. Probably can't really tell on the YouTube, but if you notice, it adds more sharpness to the photo, more detail. Definitely cannot tell once you zoom out. All right, go ahead and what did I do here? Shift, merge layers. All right, so here's before, after. All right, and that's pretty much the basic edit that I go through with the Mavic 3 night photos. Hit a like, leave a comment if you have any questions or any concerns, and yep, thank you.